Alright, so for this set of videos, I'm basically going to do one page for each video. That way you can kind of shorten it up. You don't have to watch everything. The test review is pretty much broken up by section. So basically, I was there for 7.1, 7.2, and most of 7.3. So 7.4, 7.5, and part of 7.3 was taught to you by my substitute. So anyways, I'm going to try to work through this at kind of a medium pace because I don't want to waste too much of your time. And this is the second time. You notice this one is after parts 3 and 4 that I'm having to do it. So anyways, without further ado, we're going to start with section 7.1. So remember, this was the one that we kind of looked at scale factors and proportions. We didn't do a whole lot of geometry in this one. So remember, when you've got a proportion, cross multiply, okay? There's some slight differences with these, but you're using the same principles, okay? So for number 1, 3 times 7 is 21. That's one cross. 2 times x plus 2 is the other cross. Make sure you distribute that 2 to both the x and the plus 2, okay? It's usually where people mess up if they do on these. So I got 2x equals 17. When I divide 17 by 2, I get x equals 8.5. I'm okay with you leaving the decimal like that. If it came out as like 8.33333 in your calculator, change it to a fraction, okay? Because you'll see fractions on the SOL test. I want you to get used to that. But if it terminates, it stops, 8.5, done, that's fine. You can leave it. For number 2, again, proportion, doing the same thing. So I've got 4 times 9 is 36, but in the other cross, I've got x times x is x squared, x times negative 5 is negative 5x. An issue that some people usually have with this, x times x, they accidentally write it as 2x. That'd be x plus x, okay? So x times x is x squared. So whenever I see that x squared term, that means I know that I've got to move everything over to one side and have it set equal to 0. So in this case, I have to move the 36 over. So I get x squared minus 5x minus 36 equals 0. So now I've got to look, what two numbers multiply to get me to the last, which is negative 36, but add to get me to the center number. So in this case, the only options is negative 9 and positive 4. So remember, once you've factored, you got to set each piece equal to 0. So x minus 9 equals 0, so that means x would have to be 9. And x plus 4 equals 0, so that means x would have to be negative 4. Okay. In this case, since I didn't have any diagrams with like sides or angles or anything like that, it's okay to have x as a negative, okay? When I go to look down below, I can't have a negative side length, okay? So just be careful when you're looking at these. So now, just another kind of hint for this as well. If your last number is a negative, then you're going to have the two numbers have different signs. So one has to be a negative, one has to be a positive. Also, if it's a positive, then both are either going to have to be positive, because positive times positive is equal to positive, or negative, because negative times negative is positive. So they're going to have to be the same. For the center sign, it's always going to match the sign of the bigger number. So in this case, I had negative 5x. So that means my bigger number, which was 9, has to be the negative 1. So you don't have to use that little hint. It just makes things go faster when you go to factor. If you look at number 4 here, the 5 was positive, so that means the bigger number has to be positive. In this case, it was 7. Okay. 3 works a lot like number 1. Cross multiply. Don't have an x squared term, so I just solve it kind of like normal. 4, I'm only going to have for the pre-AP folks just because you're having a FOIL. It's more of an algebra skill. So anyways, so the CB classes, you could have skipped this on your test review. Okay. So when I go to FOIL, x plus 6 times x minus 1, it's like you're multiplying x times x is x squared. X times negative 1 is negative 1x. 6 times x is 6x. When I combine those, I get 5x. 6 times negative 1 is negative 6. The other cross is 8. Work it the same way as you did number 2 after that. Okay. Don't worry, pre-AP classes, I'm not going to have them all like that. You're going to have kind of one of each. You're going to have one that's a little bit easier, one that's kind of in the middle, one that's a little bit harder. Okay. For number 5, remember with these, there was kind of 2 options. We either had a total, and I would have to add the parts to equal the whole thing, or you basically had to set up a proportion when you didn't have a total. So if I look at this one, I know right off the bat I'm going to be adding the parts because I know I have a total because it says complementary angles. So if they're ever talking about complementary angles, remember they total to be 90 degrees. Supplementary angles, total to be 180 degrees. Perimeter is the total of all the sides. Triangles, triangle angle measures have a total of 180 degrees. Okay, so if we're looking at those things, that means I've got to add the parts, the 7 and the 11, to equal the total, which is 90. So 7x and 11x, 18x. Divide that from 90, I get 5. Doesn't mean the angle is 5. It means the angle is 7 times 5, which is 35. If they asked for the larger angle, it would be 11 times 5, which is 55. Okay. If instead they maybe asked for just the height of a triangle or just the length of a rectangle or something like that, then you've got to use a proportion. If they talk about a total, you're adding things and setting it equal to whatever that total is. Okay? So a lot of times you see this with ratios of boys to girls. Colored M&Ms is what I used in class. Things like that. Okay? So total, add equal to the total. If it doesn't have the total, got to set up a proportion. So for 7.2, so it says the polygons are similar. So with these, you got 2 important things. If your variable is an angle, you're setting them equal. If your variable is a side, you're setting up a proportion. So if I look at number 6 here, to find x, I'm setting things equal because it's an angle. To find y, I'm setting up a proportion because it's a side. Okay. So we're actually going to find x first. So 3x has to equal that angle of 80. Remember 80 and the 100 here? They're a linear pair. So I did 180 minus 100 to find out that the 80 was missing inside. So remember linear pair from way back in chapter 1. They have to add up to be 180 when they form that straight line. So that means 3x has to be 80. So x is 80 over 3. Okay, just leave that one as a fraction because the decimal doesn't stop, doesn't terminate. For y, I've got to set up a proportion because it is a side length. Okay, so if I look here, let's scroll down a little bit. My y, it's kind of like the back bumper of the car, has to match with 2, which is also the back bumper. So y over 2. 12, which is the bottom of the car, has to match with 4, which is the bottom of the car. And I'm going to set those proportions equal, or those ratios equal, to make a proportion. So I've got y over 2 is going to equal 12 over 4. Okay. So y is going to be 6. If I wanted to do my scale factor, I would have to just pick a pair of sides, like 12 and 4. You'll notice that's what I did down here. To find z, the problem is z is that front bumper. It's matching with this 3y minus 2. I can't solve two variables at once, but luckily we have already found y. We found y is 6. So when I plug in y of 6, I've got 3 times 6 minus 2. 3 times 6 is 18, minus 2 gives me to 16. Okay, so I've got that side of 16 is pairing with the z, front bumper and front bumper. Or I guess maybe windshield since it's diagonal. I don't know. Y'all probably don't see the car like I do. I'm kind of crazy. And then the 12 is still pairing up with the 4. Okay, so whenever you're setting up these proportions, you're always using just one variable, and then you always want at least one of the fractions, if you can, to be just numbers. Okay, it makes it a lot easier. So 16 over z equals 12 over 4. You can cross multiply at this point. And I already went over scale factor for there. For 7, x again as a side, so I had to set up a proportion. X matches with 9, 4 matches with 6. I could have also done x over 9 equals 12 over 18, because those match as well. Doesn't matter, you can pick either set. Cross multiply, you get 6x equals 36 in this case, so x is 6. Okay. For y, same process. Y is matching with 12, and either 4 matches with 6, or you could have done 12 and 18. Or you could have even done 6 and 9 from the x. Okay. Cross multiply, you get y equals 8. For the scale factor, I've just got to pick one pair of sides. So I picked the easiest one, because they were the smallest numbers. 4 and 6, you always do first to second. So 4 over 6 reduces down to 2 over 3. For number 8 here, x is an angle, so that means it's set equal to something. It's no proportion. So x is just equal to that other angle of 30. Because remember, the angles are equal in similar polygons. For y, it is a side length, so that means I know that I have to set up a proportion. No way around it. Okay, so y is matching with 2.5. Why? Because why not? Just kidding. So y is matching with 2.5. 8 is matching with 5. Again, I'm only using one variable here at a time. So when I cross multiply, 5y equals 20. So y is going to be 4. To find my scale factor, just pick a pair of sides. 8 over 5. Can't reduce it any. Okay. Let's see. For number 9, a little bit harder, but not too bad. So when I go to set up the proportions, 3 matches with the 9. Just kind of rotated that triangle. If I were to reduce that fraction, it's my scale factor. That's how I get that off to the side. But to solve the proportion, 3 is matching with 9. Z, which is a side, matches with z plus 4. Now I know what some of y'all are saying. Whoa, whoa, whoa. He just said you can only have one variable in the proportions when you're solving these. And that is true. And it's still true. You'll notice that I've only got z's there. I'm not mixing x's and y's or anything like that. I got the same variable z. It's in 2 places. That's okay. Okay. So anyways, when I go to cross multiply, I've got 3 times z, which is 3z, 3 times 4, which is 12, and then in the other cross, 9z, just algebra from there to get z of 2.